What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Please be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you end up enjoying this video, doing any of those helps the video to do well and the channel to do well, and ensures I can continue making this content daily for many years to come. If you guys have any thoughts about the video, please be sure to share them in the comments below, as I always read all of them, even if I don't always get the chance to respond to them all. Last but not least, if you guys would like to support the channel further than you already do just by watching, liking, subscribing, and all that, please be sure to check out the join button somewhere around the subscribe button. If you click on that, it will let you join the channel membership for as low as $2 a month, and you get special access to emoticons you can use when you comment, and special icons that appear next to your name as well. No content will ever be locked behind the paywall. It's just something extra you can do if you'd like to support the channel further. Without further ado though guys, we'll get right into the stories, and I hope you guys enjoy them. Have a great day. This happened when I was in college 4 years ago. I went to a university that was very close to the ocean on the East Coast. I made friends with some people one weekend, and one guy in the group of people I met invited us to go out on his boat with him sometime. He described his boat to many people and was very proud to have it. It sounded like a very expensive sailboat by the way he described it. I'm not really familiar with ocean vehicles myself, and haven't ever been on one other than a cruise ship when I was only 11 years old. This guy said his parents had bought it for him. That made sense because he was known to be a spoiled rich kid, I guess. He was a nice guy though, and the thought of cruising around some Sunday afternoon and drinking some beer sounded quite appealing. After that conversation, I saw him around in school, but I didn't really talk to him much. That is, until one day, he approached me in the library and asked me if I still wanted to go sailing. I said sure. That sounded like a lot of fun. He told me the following day he was going to go out on the water, and it would be a perfect opportunity. After a lengthy conversation about how sailing works and him assuring me that it was safe and that he knew what he was doing, I told him I would meet him at the docks the next morning. That night, my roommate asked me what I was doing for the weekend. I told him I made some plans to go sailing. He freaked out on me and told me he really wished that he could go as well. My roommate and I were really good friends, and honestly, it sounded like way more fun if he was to join us. So I invited him to go as well. I was pretty sure the other guy would be cool with this, since he'd invited other people before. The next morning, my roommate and I grabbed some coffee, then went and grabbed some beers from the store to bring along with us on our voyage. We ate some breakfast, then headed over to the docks to meet the guy. We were pretty excited. When we got there, we followed the directions he'd given me and found his boat pretty much right away. It was a huge orange and white sailboat. We stood on the dock next to it admiring it when the guy popped his head up from somewhere inside. He immediately showed a look of concern on his face. He jumped off the side of the boat and onto the dock right next to us. He looked at my roommate, then at myself, and asked, "Who's this?" I told him he was my roommate and he was a cool guy. He'd asked if he could come along, so I told him I didn't think the guy would mind. The guy looked very annoyed, and it was awkward for about a minute or so. The guy kept looking back and forth between us and the boat. He took his hat off and rubbed his head, like he was really stressed out. Eventually he sighed and said it was fine. A few hours later, we were on the boat drinking and having fun. The water was pretty smooth sailing, and the sun was shining brightly in the sky. The guy who invited us had acted off the whole time though. I figured it was because he was annoyed I'd brought my roommate. After drinking 3 or 4 beers, I felt the courage to ask the guy what was wrong. If he was still pissed off, I'd brought my friend with me. He responded with something along the lines of, "It just kinda ruined my plans, you know?" My roommate chimed in and asked what his plans were. I could tell my roommate thought it was funny. It sounded like the guy really wanted to be alone with me. The guy just looked at him deadpan and said, "Well, because you're here, now I can't kill him." This took me off guard completely. I felt a surge of fear and unbelievable relief hit me at the same time. My roommate and this guy started cracking up. My roommate brushed it off as a joke. I didn't know what to think though. Was this guy serious? He certainly looked dead serious to me. Had I just narrowly avoided being killed, or was his sense of humor just that weird? I believe I got my answer when I went down below deck an hour later to grab another beer from the fridge. Right next to the fridge was this brown swinging door that led to a private bedroom. I was feeling the beer pretty good at this point. Without thinking, I pushed the door open to have a look. Lying at the foot of the bed was this big cinder block, tied around some yellow rope. There was some tape and what looked like a recorder of some sort as well. After seeing that, I felt sick to my stomach. I wanted off this boat as soon as possible. I wanted to go back up and confront the guy. I decided against it though, because I had no idea what this guy was capable of. What seemed like hours and hours more of being with this psycho. We finally made it back to the dock. We said our goodbyes, and on the way back I told my roommate about what I'd seen down there. He couldn't believe it. I'm pretty sure my roommate saved my life that day. I'm not even kidding you. I never saw that guy that invited us on campus ever again after. What he planned for that night, I don't really want to know. I'm a 28-year-old woman who tried out OnlyFans for a short period of time. Yeah, I know, but my husband and I thought it would be fun to spice things up and make a little bit of money at the same time together. I signed up using a nickname, of course, and didn't put my location. No personal information on any of the sites, so I didn't really think it was a big deal. Plus, I only did it for a few months anyway. I'm not really huge into social media, so navigating Reddit and Twitter and all that was a bit of a struggle for me. My parents were always overly cautious on social media and always imparted on me the dangers inherent to it. I wasn't allowed on it very much either. Because of this, I was really sheltered from a lot of the coming of age, so to speak, stories of the kids from our generation talking to strangers online. Eventually, I found a niche subreddit to try and promote myself and get reactions to my OnlyFans. I had posted some fantasies and things on there, so I could try and do a little bit of promoting. Little did I know I would attract some very bad things. I had only posted a few times on that subreddit, and I had my DMs off. I only replied to a couple of comments before getting pretty bored. I didn't really like being on there, to be honest. Reddit can be a very depressing place. I wasn't really liking the way I was being treated on there, and I wasn't getting any traction anyway. I deleted my Reddit, my Twitter, and our OnlyFans. Months go by, and I was feeling a bit better. I thought maybe I had perhaps jumped the gun on deleting everything, when all of a sudden I got a text message one day. It was from an area code that I live in, asking for me by my full legal first name. Needless to say, I was very confused. I asked who this was. It turns out it was someone who followed me on Reddit and OnlyFans. Here's what his text said. "Hi, it's me, R. I put in so many hours to try and find you. I paid for all your OnlyFans. When you deleted it, I felt like a part of me died inside. I think about you every day." I had no idea how the hell this guy found me. I called my husband, but all he really could do was tell me to be careful and to block this guy. I said okay and did just that. About an hour later, he sent me another message from a different number, listing off my dad's name, my uncle, my husband, and many other people I knew. He then said, "All these people are connected to your number. I'm going to message all of them until you respond. I need you." At this time, I was screenshotting all of this. I was sending it to my husband. As you can imagine, he was really pissed off. He was not one to sit back and let people harass me. He called the number and threatened the guy to leave me alone. Another text came in right after, saying, "You could just talk to me and have some fun. You know, make some money instead of having your husband get all mad." At this point, I was hysterical. I was terrified and also mad at myself for posting any of that at all. I wasn't responding to anything he was saying, and I blocked each number as they came in. He still kept making new ones to send all these texts. My husband was trying to figure out if we knew who this was. I did have some guys subscribe to my OnlyFans that I had gone to school with, so we thought maybe it was one of them trying to mess with me. This guy kept insisting he needed to talk to me, and my husband kept trying to tell him he had the wrong girl, that I wasn't even on OnlyFans, trying to make him question himself. This guy knew exactly who I was, though. He knew all my information. He sent my husband screenshots of my personal Facebook and my private Instagram. I even go by a completely different name on there. My husband threatened he was going to call the police. The man replied he hadn't even done anything wrong or made any threats, so there was nothing they would do. I was literally at home shaking as my husband sent me these screenshots of their messages. I begged him to stop talking to him, but he thought if he could get this guy to say something personal, maybe we could track him down and call the police or something. The guy just wouldn't stop though. He kept messaging everyone saying he wanted to meet up with us and to not be so uptight. I finally had enough and called the non-emergency line to talk to a detective about the situation. I was terrified. My husband owns a personal business, and the guy told us he had Googled that name and found the business address, then traced that to find our personal address as well. Of course, the detective couldn't do much. He did contact the guy and warn him, and had an open report if anything were to happen. I know this might not seem as terrifying to some of you, but it goes to show you how dangerous the internet is. I didn't think I could be tracked down just by a few pictures with all my information hidden, but the internet can definitely be a scary place. All of you out there, be safe and careful, and make sure to use a VPN. As for you, if you happen to hear this, you're a real creep, and I would never want to meet up with you in a million years. Before we start, when this happened, I was an 11-year-old male in 5th grade. For some background, my bus stop is right across the street from my house, and also a few streets away from the tennis club, of which I am a member. Okay, now to the story itself. I was getting ready for school and walked out to my bus stop. No one else was there, so I figured they'd all probably already gotten rides to school. My parents had been letting me go alone to the bus stop for about a year now, but after this incident, I don't really want to anymore. I was standing outside just kind of looking around, when about 100 yards away, I saw something quite odd. I shook it off though, since I couldn't quite tell what it was. I looked again a bit later, trying to observe it even closer. That was when I noticed that staring at me 100 yards away was a clown head, tilted and just plain creepy looking. I'll also mention that this was in the direction of the tennis club. I ran back to my house right away, and when I say ran, I mean I could have won a gold medal in the Olympics with how fast I was running. I ran to my mom, panting and crying. When I reached the front porch, I could see that whoever that was had run off towards the tennis club. Luckily, my mom walked out with me and stayed there. I had tennis lessons after school, and believe me, I did not want to go at all. I was afraid the clown would be at the tennis courts. Tennis was pretty great though. I had almost forgotten about the incident earlier, except when leaving the club, I saw that very same clown hiding at the edge of the woods, next to the outdoor tennis courts. I didn't tell my mom at the time. I figured she wouldn't really believe me. I mean, who would? Fast forward 2 weeks. My mom was taking a walk while I was home alone. When I happened to peek outside because I had a weird feeling, I saw a clown walking up and down my street. He was walking the length of my house and side yard over and over, and looked like he was planning something. I shook it off even though I was honestly really scared. About 40 seconds later, I heard a knock at the door. Just one knock though. I saw the clown walk back out onto the road. He then walked up the hill and disappeared out of sight. I called my mom and told her about everything. In just 5 minutes, she was already home, and I was screaming and crying. I was very happy when she arrived, but I was still very scared as well. I told everyone, my principal, even the school officer got involved, but they found nothing. Later that night, after the knock on the door, I told my dad as well. Of course, he didn't believe me, and I hadn't expected him to, but my mom convinced him to listen to my story. I've never stayed home alone since, and I'm still very scared of that mystery clown. I told my friends at the bus stop about this too, just in case they were in danger as well. We even started a crime watch in the neighborhood because of this. I still walk out without my parents every now and then, but only when my friends are also at the bus stop as well. I'm a 14-year-old girl from Ireland. A few months ago, before my family moved houses, we lived in a kind of bad neighborhood where a lot of crime took place. One day, I traveled by train to get to my cousin's house, as the journey would be far too long on foot. I had to be there at a certain time. I scanned my ticket, sat down, and began reading a book I had brought with me. From somewhere nearby, though, I started to hear these strange sobbing sounds. Whoever this was panting, as though they were having an anxiety attack. I tried to ignore it, but it got worse and worse. Eventually, I looked up and saw a young woman who looked to be in her early to late 20s, crying with her head in her hands. I immediately got up and asked if she was all right. She didn't get up or anything, she just looked at me. I remembered the petrified look on her face to this very day. Her eyes were full of tears, and she was shaking as well. I was wondering why the hell everyone else on the train was just sitting there letting this happen, because apart from passengers with headphones in their ears, they could all hear her. She never answered me. After we locked eyes, she abruptly sprinted to another seat. She began staring at the ground with her long hair falling over her shoulders and face. I was worried that I had upset her even more and assumed she just wanted to be left alone. Whatever was wrong with her was clearly a private matter. I sat back down and tried to begin reading again, but I couldn't take my mind off of what just happened. It honestly made me shiver, to the point where I became paranoid for the rest of the ride. After the next 2 stops, I looked around since I didn't hear her crying anymore. She was gone, and I assumed she had gotten off. The next stop was mine. As I began walking to my cousin's house, I kept thinking about that woman I had encountered, wishing I had acted a bit differently. The next day, after I got back home, I was scrolling through my news feed when I came across an article about a 32-year-old journalist named Jennifer. She'd been found dead and mutilated just 2 streets away from the train station. I saw a picture of her, and I almost dropped my phone. I recognized her face and hair. There was a graphic censored image of her body. According to the story, her body was found gutted and soaked in blood, with her clothes torn to shreds. Her innards had been strewn about by her dismembered corpse. It looked as though she had been dead for quite a while. This made me sick. I wished I had never clicked on that story. Later that night, I began to see many more bigger news networks covering it. Last I heard, they never found out who did it. Apparently, she had been sexually assaulted before being killed. An anonymous witness later told police he had seen her crying on the train. I felt extremely sorry for this poor girl, for the horrific account of agony she must have gone through. She must have had some idea of what was going to happen to her for her to be crying like that on the train. It still shakes me to my core thinking back on it. I told my mother and she reported what I'd seen to the police. She never wanted me to take the train again after. My cousin told me that before anyone else arrived at her house that night and I came over, she had seen a suspicious-looking man. He was wearing worn-out jeans and a black hoodie, slowly walking back and forth past her house. She didn't see his face and didn't think much of it at the time. Now, though, after we found out what happened, she became traumatized too and didn't go out for weeks afterward, not even to go to school. I hope that woman rests in peace and that her family finds justice one day. I'll never look or think of a train in the same way ever again. This might go without saying, but in order to protect the privacy of myself and my family, I'm going to refrain from using any real names or locations in this story, just in case. Last year, my town hosted a Comic-Con event. My wife and I decided to go, since we had talked about it for years. We found a babysitter for our 2 small children and decided to just enjoy the night. Just to clear up one thing, by the way, this wasn't like San Diego Comic-Con or anything. It was a much smaller event, since the city I live in is much smaller than San Diego, obviously. Me and my wife decided to dress up as characters from the Marvel movies. I know a lot of people these days are somewhat annoyed with the franchise, but it's something my wife and I really bond over. They'll always have a special place in my heart. I was dressed up as Captain America, and my wife was dressed up as Gamora, a character from Guardians of the Galaxy in case you didn't know. Since my wife designs costumes for a living, our outfits were top-notch. The event was having a costume contest for everyone cosplaying, so we decided to enter. I thought one of us was going to win for sure. That was until I saw the dozens of other incredible costumes. During the competition, we spent a lot of time hanging out with the fellow contestants, and actually met another couple who were wearing costumes from the Marvel movies as well. In no time at all, we were being our dorky selves, and I was making everyone laugh. My wife ended up finishing second in the competition to one of the most amazing and ridiculous Sephiroth costumes I'd ever seen. Even though the rest of us lost, we all had our fun, and the 4 of us continued to hang out for the majority of the evening. As the night progressed, I noticed the man of the couple was starting to act a little bit weird. I mentioned it once to my wife, who told me it was just my imagination, and that I needed to stop worrying so much since I tend to worry quite a lot. I agreed and went back to trying to have a good time. When my wife mentioned to them that we were thinking about leaving soon, they both got really upset and insisted that we hang out for a while longer. My wife told them we had 2 small children at home and that we needed to get ready to leave right now. I remember getting visibly annoyed with the man because he kept saying the kids would be fine for just a while longer and to all grab a drink together. Clearly, this man did not have small children or any children of his own. At this point in the evening, I just wanted to get home. My wife, being the smooth-talking diplomat that she was able to communicate to these 2 that we had to leave right now, and it was not something personal. We were having a really great time. Good thing for her, because I would have probably handled their pushy behavior in a much more toxic way. Finally, we left and made our drive home. The weird and uncomfortable final minutes with those 2 didn't cast a bad shadow over the entire convention. We had an awesome time, had fun pictures and videos, and most importantly, we made some awesome memories together. We got home, paid the babysitter, and put the kids to bed, since they were still awake and waiting for us when we got back. Then we got into bed as well. We decided to watch the first Avengers movie. As a side note, that movie was our first date, hence why we have such a special place in our hearts for Marvel. We both fell asleep at some point during the movie. In the middle of the night, though, my wife woke me up, claiming she had heard someone knocking on the door. I thought for sure it was just her imagination, but I went and checked anyway. As I was walking to the front door with my wife standing right behind me, someone knocked on the door again. Before checking to see who was outside, I briefly glanced at the time. I saw it was already 3 a.m. Right away, I was completely freaked out. I approached the door and shouted, "Who is it?" There was a small pause. Then a confident and upbeat voice could be heard from the other side. "How do you do, Cap? You guys ready for that drink yet?" We both looked at each other. The voice was obvious. It was clearly the acquaintance we'd made at the convention. I opened the front door, but not the glass door in front of it, which was still locked. As soon as I opened the front door, he tried to grab at the glass door. Thankfully, as I said before, it was locked. He took a step back quickly and asked if we were ready to hang out. I was firm and angry and told them in so many words to get the hell off our property. If I ever saw them again, I would call the cops immediately. They walked away smiling, shaking their heads as if there was some crazy surprise that I had flipped out on them. We got back into bed, and my wife thought I should have called the cops. I didn't want to bother at that point. They left, so I assumed my tone was enough to get the message across. I couldn't have been more wrong. I fell back asleep not long after the ordeal, but my wife was wide awake. About an hour later, she started to tap my shoulder, claiming she could hear something from outside the bedroom again. I got up and opened the door, expecting to see nothing there. Instead, standing at the end of the hall was the couple from the convention. They were in my home, standing there and still wearing their Marvel superhero costumes. Instinctively, I pushed my wife back into the room and shut the door. I ran across the hall and closed the door of my kids' bedroom as well. While that was happening, the two were walking down the hall towards me. Thankfully, my wife's phone was in the bedroom. While I was holding my kids' bedroom door shut, my wife called the police. I could hear one of them trying to open the door to the room that I was in. The other was trying to open the other bedroom door my wife was in. Thank God the cops showed up very quickly, and neither one of them resisted. They were still smiling and laughing, even while they were being dragged away by the police. I'm not sure if these monsters were on some sort of drug or just outright evil. As you would expect, they were both charged. And last I knew, they're both still behind bars. That's something I can't 100% confirm, though. The one thing that kills me, though, is that I have no idea why these two did this. What did they want? They never said why they terrorized us, nor what their intentions were in the first place. The entire evening, they seemed like really great and fun individuals for the most part. I don't know what clicked in their heads to make them snap like they did. I'm thankful our children were young enough that they don't seem to remember that night at all, and I'm hoping nothing like that ever happens again. When I was a child, my family moved to a big old 2-story house with big empty rooms and creaking floorboards. Both of my parents worked at the time, so I was often home alone when I came home from school. One early evening when I came home, the house was completely dark inside. I called out for my mom to see if she was there, and I heard her say something from upstairs. I called her again as I climbed the stairs to see which room she was in. We were decorating at the time, and I didn't know my way around the maze of rooms yet. She was in one of the far ones right down the hall, it seemed. I felt a bit uneasy for some reason, but I figured that was only natural. I rushed forward to see my mom, knowing her presence would calm the fears as a mother's presence always does. Just as I reached for the handle of the door to let myself into the room, though, I heard the front door downstairs open, and my mom called out to me, "Sweetie, are you home?" I jumped back startled and ran back down the stairs to her. As I glanced back to the top of the stairs, I could see the door to the room was now slightly open, and for a brief moment, I could see someone peeking out at me from behind it. I told my mom right away. We went up there to check together, but when we checked, no one was there. This story happened to me surrounding my job. I haven't told this one to anybody in a while because it's been so long since it happened, but I remember it being one of the most terrifying moments of my entire life. I was 17. I remember it was fall because I had a hoodie on over my work uniform. I didn't have a car at the time, so once in a while when I couldn't cop a ride, I ended up having to walk a couple of miles to make it to work. This particular morning was one of those times. The walk was pretty normal, kind of nice actually. That time of morning, most people were already at work, so the streets were kind of empty and quiet. I remember thinking it was really nice out, a nice temperature, the beautiful falling leaves. I enjoyed the thought of not seeing many people on my walk. I had gone about a mile or so when I saw a man just up ahead carrying a six-pack and standing in the dead center of the sidewalk. I thought this sight was a little bit weird for this time of day, but honestly I was more upset about having to walk around him than I was about him being there at all. As I approached, he noticed me as well. He stared at me as I walked closer, not even pretending to look away. I started to get a little bit anxious actually, but I didn't really have any extra time to mess around. I figured I'd ignore him if he tried talking to me once I was within earshot. He smiled and I braced myself. I remember thinking that I was too tired to be dealing with any catcalling. As I walked around him, he started walking to keep pace with me. That's when I started to freak out a little. I wanted to put on a brave face, so I refused to look at or acknowledge him, looking forward. I tried to keep a neutral expression, as if him stumbling along beside me didn't faze me at all. He started talking to me. "Hey honey, where are you going?" His breath reeked, and I could tell he was probably dead drunk. Up close, I noticed he was dirty. His hair was greasy and his beard was scraggly. It looked like he had been living out of a dumpster. I kept my eyes ahead of me. "I'm going to work," I mumbled, picking up the pace a bit. He kept on walking beside me. "Oh, do you work close by?" When I didn't answer, he continued on his own. "Because I live here. Do you want to come to my place maybe and party with me instead?" I shook my head. I could feel his eyes scanning over my body. His voice was a low whisper at this point, and I was starting to panic. "Yeah, you can come with me. We'll have lots of fun. I'll pay you after we're done if that's what you want," he murmured. At this point, I was almost in tears. I did the only thing that seemed logical. I booked it. It was not a full-on sprint, but it was fast enough to catch him off guard and get myself somewhere safe. I found myself now desperately wishing there were other people around. I looked over my shoulder to see the man running after me. He was still a little bit unsteady on his feet, though. I was terrified. I'm not very quick, and I didn't know if him being drunk would be enough of a handicap for me to escape. I made it around the corner. When up ahead, I saw a woman step out of the bus stop. I looked behind me again to see if he was still chasing me. I looked just in time to see him wipe out on one of the uneven pieces of the sidewalk and crack his head on the corner of the curb. He rolled out onto the street with his beer and didn't get up. I was too shaken and angry to really care, though. I slowed my pace, and once I got up to the woman near the bus stop, she smiled at me, saying something about how he dropped his beer. I didn't reply to her. I walked the rest of the way back to work, looking over my shoulder now and then. To this day, I wonder what happened to that guy. Was he dead? Did he wake up in the middle of the street sometime later and wander off to find someone else to party with? I guess I'll never know. This happened to me in my early 20s, and as a direct result of this experience, I've now developed a strong fear and mistrust of the opposite sex. For that reason, I'll be keeping my identity anonymous. It happened one night when I was on my way home from work. I got off the train at my usual station, and I was walking down the street in the direction of my home. I had my earbuds in and was listening to music. It was just an ordinary night, really. As I was walking, I sensed a presence behind me, so naturally I glanced backward. I guessed that I might have been in someone's way or something. I looked back to see a man on a bicycle. He was wearing a surgical mask, so I couldn't see his face very clearly. He looked very young, though. When I heard his voice, I guessed he was about the same age as me. He called out, something along the lines of, "Hey, when I saw you, I knew I just had to stop and talk to you. You are so my type. Are you free right now?" Realizing this guy was just trying to hit on me, I pretended I couldn't hear anything over my music. I just kept hoping he would leave me alone. "Hey, can you hear me or are you busy? Why is that? Why don't you just give me your contact information? I won't even contact you. Why the hell do you want my number then?" I wondered. I realized this creep was not going to just get the hint, so I decided to go a little stronger. I made a big gesture of turning my head away from him and upped my pace as well. He did freak out a bit, but it only took me another 3 or 4 minutes to get home. I just focused on what I wanted to do when I got in. I told myself soon I would be sitting on my sofa watching a movie behind locked doors. I didn't look back. I just kept walking to get to my place. I had to go along some busier streets and some quieter ones. When I turned off to head down the quieter street, I noticed something suddenly coming up from behind me. I heard some kind of clanking sound. It sounded like metal rubbing against metal. I turned around to see what was coming. I saw amidst the darkness of the night, that guy wearing a surgical mask coming right at me on his bicycle. I thought our brief and horrible exchange was over, but it seemed pretty clear to me he had been following me the entire time. My first thought was a really strange one. Even if I ran home as fast as I could, he would still catch me. It was true, he did have a bike. With that thought came a kind of internal avalanche of fear. I was confused and scared. I wanted nothing more than to be off these dark streets. I remembered there was a coin laundromat nearby that I sometimes used. I figured I could get there and into the light in about 10 seconds. There might be people there too if I was lucky enough to find someone in the laundromat. Then that guy would surely go away. If not, I could lock the door from the inside if I had to, then call the police. I turned around and started running. The metal clanking sound was getting louder. I guess that was probably the sound of the pedals on his worn-out bike. I knew without turning around that meant he must be pedaling faster in pursuit of me. I threw open the door to the laundromat and jumped inside without the creep catching me. Of course, no one was in there. There were no other customers, just my luck. I was having that sort of night. I locked the door behind me. I knew how to lock the door because I'd helped the owner with it before. I headed right to the back of the room. I was shaking with fear and breathing heavily. I grabbed my phone. As I was frantically trying to unlock it, I saw the shadow appear in the front door outside. The guy who was following me had arrived. He dropped his bike to the ground and started trying to open the door. He realized I'd locked it, and this angered him a whole lot. "Hey, open the door. Come on, just open it. Come on, it's not like I'm gonna do anything to you. I won't do anything, okay? Just give me your number. I won't even contact you, but if you just give it to me, I'll go away." He just kept on saying stuff like that. I remember because he said he wanted my number but wouldn't contact me. Now he was saying to open the door. The way he was double speaking was really creepy to me. It was like his true intentions were slipping out when he was getting frustrated. I wondered what more would happen to me if he got even more angry. He started pounding on the door with clenched fists and shaking the handle. The entire door was shaking in the frame. The door was primarily made out of glass, so I wasn't sure how much of a beating it could really take. I was absolutely terrified what was going to happen to me if that man managed to get in. I couldn't just stand there cowering and waiting for him to get inside. I yelled at him and told him I'd called the police and they would be here any minute. I told him he was an idiot and he'd better stop right now. He stopped banging on the door and calmly dropped his arms down to his sides. He looked me in the eyes, and I could tell he hated me in that moment. I think I'd really upset his ego by calling him stupid. He then pointed at me and said he was going to kill me. He turned and kept muttering something, but I couldn't hear what he was saying. He picked up his bike and left. I couldn't move for 10 minutes. I had to, though, when an actual customer came to use the laundromat. I unlocked the door with my trembling hands and called the police. I made sure someone stayed with me on the phone until I got home. I got home safely that night. I hated that night at home, though, because that horrible experience happened on a road I regularly used to get home. It led to a lot of fear and negativity during my commutes to work. It really ruined my life. In order to get back to being myself again, I had to move. I had to get away. I couldn't live each day, wondering if I would run into that man again. Thankfully, I never did, but it still scares me to this day, knowing that he could still be out there somewhere. A couple of years ago, one of my closest friends relocated cross-country with his long-term girlfriend to take a job he couldn't refuse. Only issue he had was that he didn't want to fly his dogs out with him when they made the move. They'd be staying in a hotel for the first month of their stay. He was also a bit hesitant to fly them out for health concerns for both pets. By the time he'd located a home to rent, he was really missing them though, and made a request of his sister, another close friend, and myself to drive them to him in LA. We're all Chicago folks, so the trip would be quite a long one. With the three of us to foot the nearly 30-hour drive though, surely it would be a piece of cake. We left early and drove long hours. Along the way, it was decided between my friend and I that we'd foot the majority of the drive ourselves, and if we needed to, we would let the friend's sister do some driving as well. We were on a bit of a time crunch due to a snafu with the rental agreement, so we didn't have the luxury to stop very often. Past an 8-hour stay in Denver, the rest of the journey itself was relatively smooth, barring getting pulled over right before entering Utah for driving 2 miles in the left lane of an empty highway. From that point, we made it through Utah, Arizona, and Nevada without any further trouble. That is, until we entered California. We were in need of gas, and I had been driving for the majority of the first day. I tagged my buddy in after being pulled over, and I remained in the shotgun seat as navigator, searching through the GPS for a fuel stop. I found a sign pointing to Yermo Ghost Town, which had a mobile gas station. How wonderful. It was convenient, and it was located almost directly off the interstate. We rolled in on a little more than fumes. When we approached the pumps, normally we would let the dogs out at every rest stop, but having stopped not long before and with both dogs sleeping snugly in the back seat, I decided to pump gas without anyone else leaving the vehicle. My buddy pulled up on the opposite side of a beat-up green sedan, where a short, plump gentleman had just turned in to approach the shop. I noticed a few other hoopties at the pumps, all unoccupied. There were a couple of cars parked up near the station, most likely belonging to the employees. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That is, until I swiped my credit card, and the pump rejected my swipe attempt. I chalked it up to a misread, so I swiped again. The pump now read, "Please see the attendant." I was quite annoyed, but we really needed the gas. I tapped on the window and told my buddy what I was doing. I asked if anybody needed anything. After taking their orders for Gatorade and Marlboro Reds, I walked up to the store. I made a mental note of how strange this gas station was. It was eerily quiet, especially for one just off the interstate. And that was no matter, really. As I walked through the gas station, though, there was more weirdness. The first thing I noticed in the store was that there were boxes of chips just left on the floor, like someone was in the middle of restocking the shelves and then just quit. As I veered to my right, I noticed that there was no one else walking around in this place either. With the 6 cars beside my own out there, I felt like I would see somebody at least. Things got even weirder when I realized there was nobody behind the counter. No customers, no workers. Then it dawned on me. Well, what happened to the gentleman who was just leaving the pump adjacent to mine? Surely they can't all be in the bathroom. I began to have the gnawing sensation in my stomach that something was not right. I've always been a person who felt like I could trust my instincts, and those instincts were screaming at me to get the hell out of here. I wanted to run, but I thought I would look suspicious booking it out of the station that was empty, so I decided to play it cool and natural. Don't let your body language let on how badly you're freaking out in your head. I was probably only inside that station for a couple of minutes. I left, but I stopped just before exiting to listen in for anything. A flushing toilet even would have been a good sound, but there was no noise at all. As I exited the shop and saw my car, I began to feel a dread. It's like that moment in a movie where the hero is about to make it to the end of their trial, but the celebratory fanfare disappears, and in that silence something comes and strikes them down. I was about 25 yards from the car when I noticed a gentleman coming from around the side of the shop opposite of me. This was not the same man I'd seen earlier. He was quite large and had a peculiar look on his face. The best way I can describe it was like a crazy Nick Cage smile. I continued walking towards my car. When I turned back to look at him, he was now walking towards me fast and with purpose. At this point, I hopped my way back to the car with an increased urgency in my step. Of course, my friend had the door locked. There was also the 95-pound golden retriever sitting in my seat. Apparently, my travel companions had not noticed how terrified I was, nor the creepy man directly beelining in our direction. I punched the window and told him to unlock the door right now. He only halfway rolled down the window to tell me the dog was in my seat. They were afraid she would jump out when I opened the door. I reached my hand in and threw the dog towards the back seat as hard as I could. My friends were just now realizing how scared I was. He started the car and drove off quickly. I took one last look back and saw the man had stopped about a pump away from where we were, still with that same eerie look on his face. We found another gas station further down the road, this time with a ton of people inside and out. After thoroughly being creeped out and pumping the gas, we made our way back to the interstate, which meant passing that gas station again. It had been about 30 minutes since we'd pulled out initially. We went silent as we noticed those very same cars were sitting in the same spots before we had left them. After freaking out for a few minutes, I received a phone call from my credit card company about a $100 charge at a mobile station. The lady on the phone was really helpful in fixing the situation for me and was entirely creeped out by the situation as we were in the end. We made it to LA just fine and had a great vacation there. It still bothers me though. What the hell was going on at that little gas station off the highway? What was with that smiling man? This incident happened back in 2014. I had been committed to a psych ward for my own safety. A little background, I'm a woman, and I was 19 at the time this happened. I was coming off 3 years of bipolar medication while at the peak of substance abuse, facilitated by my first year in college. I was going crazy with new adult freedom. One night I had a big mental breakdown, and I was committed for the first time in the adult ward. Previously, I had only been admitted in the minors ward during my adolescence for similar episodes. Within this unit, you had to share a room with the same sex, but weren't given any proper introductions. The facility as a whole wasn't really managed effectively, nor did any of the nurses or doctors seem to care, other than to prescribe and get you out as soon as possible. I was led to the room I would be staying in. The nurse just said to the other lady in the room, "This is your new roommate," then left. The woman appeared to be in her late 40s or early 50s, Hispanic and a little bit taller than I was. She would not keep her gaze off the floor in front of her and didn't say a word or move when I tried to greet her. I noticed she had a tattoo of a cartoon version of the classic Red Devil, but as a baby of some sort. I figured I would just try and leave her to her own business and stick to my area of the room. The first night went as they normally do in a psych ward. A nightly group where my roommate declined to share anything yet again, only staring at the floor and barely moving an inch, while everyone else was lining up to be given their medication before bed. One of the people across the way started banging on their door and screaming. One guy was smiling while banging his bald head against a glass window. Some other guys behind him were screaming and jumping around. The orderlies came and took them away, their screams still lingering through the halls. Having been in psych wards before, I was not surprised by out-of-the-ordinary behavior, like yelling or fights starting, but this was something completely different to me. I was with disturbed adults now, people who had years of illnesses deteriorating their mind, not just angry little kids anymore. I actually felt scared for the first time because of the high level of unpredictability with these people. I knew I wasn't all there in the head either, but these people had me anxious and made it difficult to try and get any rest that night. You know the feeling of being awake but you haven't opened your eyes yet? The moment when you're barely waking up and everything is still in this fuzzy state of conscious. I was in that state later that night. I felt like I was waking up, as if something was forcing me awake, yet I was still so tired. I wasn't opening my eyes yet. The more I came to, though, I began to feel a pressure on my forehead, and I could sense a ton of sweat dripping on my face. I opened my eyes, only to find my roommate standing over my bed, staring me in the eye. She had one hand on my forehead, and the other in a balled-up fist against her chest. She spoke in what I assumed to be tongues. I looked into her eyes, and they were blank and vacant, empty of any emotion at all. She started whispering gibberish faster and getting louder. I was paralyzed at this moment, not sure what to do or what this woman would do if I were to do anything. There was only us in this room, and the nurse's station was all the way at the end of the hall. She started wiping the sweat off my forehead with her hand, while still speaking fast and erratically. I wasn't sure what she planned on doing next. She then put her hands around my throat. At this point, she started screaming while shaking me. That was not long before our nurse rushed in and took her off me. The nurse seemed more irritated she had to get up at all and do her job, rather than being concerned about how I was doing or feeling. She escorted the woman out and said not to worry and just go back to sleep. I don't know how I managed to fall back asleep that night. I assumed the woman got transferred to a more severe ward because I didn't see her again the next day. I was luckily able to leave later that same day. This incident has since been a reminder for me to never go back and to manage my mental well-being better, because while I do have some issues, I could be in a far worse state of mind. I still wake up some nights with lingering anxiety and have to calm myself down to go back to sleep. I never want to go back to a ward in my entire life to experience this again, or perhaps something far worse. My husband and I, on paper, look like two people that would never be together. He's got wild, long hair, covered in tattoos with a long beard, and plays guitar in a local rock band. I, on the other hand, am a nurse with no tattoos, no piercings, and I don't enjoy rock music at all. But love is quite funny that way, and you can't help who you fall for. That defines our relationship perfectly. Every year, a tattoo convention comes through our town, and since we started dating, he's been asking me to go every time. I've always been able to get out of it every year, but the last year I couldn't really find an excuse. I finally decided to just go to the convention with him. Right away, this place was completely not my scene. It was loud, and the people there were, let's just say, aggressive. He was in his full glory, though, and ended up seeing one of his oldest friends that he had lost touch with. It turns out the guy had become a tattoo artist in another state, and just so happened to have a booth at this convention. Long story short, he agreed to tattoo my husband for free. My husband wanted to show it off later at the evening in the tattoo competition that they held every year. Well, I wasn't just gonna sit at the booth for 4 hours while my husband was getting his new tattoo done. I decided to just walk around and pretend like I belonged here. I'm not even gonna lie though, I really had no idea what was going on at all. I did end up meeting some really cool people though, and seeing some awesome tattoos. The artist I liked handed me cards and I put them in my bag so I could show my husband later how amazing some of these artists were. At some point during the night, I was starting to get a bit warm, so I went outside to get some air. While I was sitting on the stone wall outside, I noticed this woman running under the tree line that was directly across from me, nervously jogging through the parking lot. I watched this woman because she looked really freaked out, and I was genuinely worried for her safety. A minute later, she was already gone. Nobody ever came out of the forest behind her or anything, so I assume maybe the woman was just partying extra hard, if you know what I mean. After a few minutes, I went back into the venue and checked on my husband, who was about 50% done with his tattoo. I sat around for a while, then started to walk around the scene again. As I walked around the convention, I noticed this side door that was open. It led to a dark hallway, it seemed. As I got closer, I noticed something a little further down it. I saw the girl I had just seen outside. She was sitting on the ground in that back room and looked borderline unconscious. I went over to see if she needed help. When I got close though, she jumped up and hit me with a large blunt object. I'm pretty sure it was some sort of pipe. I fell to the ground, and the woman got right in my face and just screamed at me. I stayed down, pretending like I was actually hurt. She ran out of the dark hall and into the convention center. I got up a few seconds later and started making my way back to my husband and his friend's booth. I was clenched over in pain, but I guess nobody really noticed, probably because they figured I'd just gotten a big tattoo or something. When I got back to them, I finally started to freak out. I was able to keep my composure until that moment, but once my husband saw the pain I was in, the waterworks started in full force. They put the tattoo on hold and immediately notified the security the venue had hired for the event. The security then notified the police as well. When they showed up, I told them all about the interaction with that woman. Unfortunately, the description of that woman was nearly identical to every single other woman that was at this event. Thankfully, the venue did have some cameras, and they were able to pull up the feed and find the woman relatively easily. It was haunting watching the footage back. It was like the clearest day. You could see the woman strike me on the head. In the same footage, after she hit me, she ran to the parking lot and tried to open numerous car doors. She was walking down the line of parked cars, pulling on every handle. Finally, she found a car with the door unlocked. She opened the door and just sat there in the back seat. She wasn't hiding or anything either. She was just sitting there in the back seat, like a passenger of the vehicle. The police and security checked the live feed, and sure enough, the woman was still in that person's car. They ran out and detained the woman immediately. She seemed to put up very little struggle when they were arresting her. They did find a knife in her back pocket. I'm glad I found out like that and never had to find out the hard way about that knife. It gives me chills. What if she intended on using that knife for the owner of the vehicle? They notified the driver of that vehicle, and more disturbingly, the owner had never seen that woman before. She was indeed just trying to find any unlocked car. It was clear this woman was not in the right state of mind. I'm not sure what happened to her. I hope she got the help she clearly needed, because I don't think she was evil or malicious or anything. I just think she had some demons that got the better of her that night. Thankfully, nobody besides me got hurt that evening, and if I didn't take that shot to the head, someone else may have gotten far more seriously injured than I. When I was 13, I had a babysitter that would come by once a week, as my mom would work late every Saturday night. I always thought I was too old to have a babysitter still, and hated having to have someone watch over me all the time. The main person my mom would have over was this 20-year-old guy named Tomas. He was the son of one of my mom's work friends, I guess. This guy was really weird though, and I didn't like him at all. He didn't talk much and acted really awkward and strange. It's hard to describe. Whenever he interacted with my mom though, he was always extra nice and very talkative. I tried to bring up his weird behavior with her, but she would always say I was just trying to get rid of him so I could stay home alone. Anyway, it was a normal Saturday night, and Tomas had just arrived a little late. As usual, my mom talked with him for a little while, then headed out to work. I walked over to the couch and turned on my Xbox to play some video games and try to pass the time away. I usually go to bed at 10 or so I'd have to spend 4 or 5 hours with Tomas. Most of the time, I'd find something to do alone. He never really talked to me anyway, and would just kind of hang around in the kitchen or in our loft area. Today was no different really. He was just hanging around in the kitchen for a while. After a few minutes though, I started to hear what sounded like him talking to someone. I tried to listen in as best I could, but I couldn't quite make out anything he was saying. The kitchen was right behind the living room that I was in, but he was talking really quietly. This went on for a few minutes, then the talking stopped altogether. That was followed by him coming into the living room and standing next to the couch. I looked up at him and saw he was holding his phone. Tomas said someone was going to come over for just a second and not to worry about anything. I didn't really know how to respond, other than just to say okay. It was pretty weird though, and I knew it was definitely not something a babysitter should be doing. I also knew there was nothing I could really do about it myself though. The next 20 minutes were really awkward, as he didn't take out his phone or anything. He just sat there on the couch with me, looking around and not saying a single word. He would usually rarely ever try to be in the same room as me, so this was pretty out of the ordinary for him. Our living room was right by the front door though, so I guess he was just waiting for that person to get there. Eventually, a car did pull into the driveway, and a man came knocking at the door. Tomas shot up and went over to the door, then stood right in front of it for a moment, before turning and telling me he'd be back in just a minute. He opened the door and walked outside, then shut the door behind him. This whole situation had me very curious as to what was going on. The blinds on the windows were cracked open just enough for me to peek outside and see the two shadows as they moved around in the driveway. I could tell the man handed Tomas a large bag, then got in his car and drove away. A few seconds later, I heard the lid of the garbage can outside slamming shut. followed by Tomas coming back inside through the front door. Something about this whole situation seemed very odd. I couldn't help myself from asking what the hell this was all about. He replied by telling me it was just his friend, and he'd left his wallet at his friend's house last night. He was only coming over to drop it off for him. Something about the way he answered made me feel uncomfortable. That also didn't explain the large bag I'd seen him holding just a few moments ago. I didn't feel safe questioning him any further though, so I just said okay and went back to playing my game. Things started to get more strange though as the night progressed onward. During the next hour, I could hear Tomas having multiple phone calls with people in the kitchen. At one point, he went to the far loft area, where I could hear him raising his voice quite intensely. I still couldn't make out what he was saying though. After the 5th or 6th call, the same car from earlier pulled into the driveway again. Tomas immediately ran outside without saying anything. I could tell from the body language and the way they were moving around that they were clearly arguing about something. Tomas left for 30 seconds, then came back with the bag from earlier. The man took it and put it in his back seat, then drove off in a hurry. He came back inside, and I could see frustration all over his face. He went over to the kitchen and didn't come back until 10, when he told me to just go to bed. I got myself ready and laid down, while Tomas stayed downstairs. He would usually stay until my mom got home at 12, but just a few moments later I heard the front door open and close. I waited for 10 minutes, then got up and went downstairs to see if he was still there. Sure enough, he was nowhere to be seen. I looked out the window and his car was gone too. I stayed up in bed for a few hours to wait for my mom to get home, then told her everything that happened. She seemed to believe me this time. She also thought it was strange and very unprofessional to leave the house before she came home. The next day, she tried to call him, but he didn't answer on any of his contact information. Eventually, she got a hold of her friend who was Tomas's mom and asked what happened. She said that he'd gone home feeling sick. We both knew that was a complete lie and didn't make much sense at all. Anyway, it's been almost 10 years since all that happened, and I still find myself thinking how weird that night was. I always wonder what the two were arguing about and why he just left me there in a hurry. What was in that bag, too? Back in 2013, I had one particular friend I used to hang out with every day. During the summer, I would go to her place even more often and hung out with her and her roommate all the time. It was a hot summer's day, and I was walking to my friend's place. I remember I was feeling a bit angry for whatever reason. While walking, I noticed a silver car passing me by. I glanced over out of curiosity and saw an older man in his 60s, seemingly checking me out. Needless to say, I was furious. I turned my head back around to focus on where I was walking and tried my best to ignore this man. I turned the corner, and out of habit, I looked back behind me. I saw the silver car's reverse lights. I remember thinking that he was probably coming back to confront me, but I didn't really care. I continued walking without a single worry in the world. Because of my paranoia though, I peeked over my shoulder every so often and saw that the man was driving behind me very, very slowly, occasionally parking to the side of the road to get some distance and not raise any suspicions. Again, I didn't really know what to think of this. I actually kind of chuckled a bit to myself. What is this old guy thinking? Is he trying to scare me? I continued on my walk and turned my cell phone camera on, activating the front camera. I tried to act dumb and pretend I had no idea he was following me, but I had my eyes on him. I kept walking, using my front-looking camera to look behind me. He was following me slowly, parking to the side of the road over and over again. I was now close by my friend's house, though. I thought of leading him there, then calling her to come down with her 3 massive dogs and scare him away. I thought it might not be such a good idea to lead a possibly deranged man to my friend's house though, so I thought of calling the cops instead. I wasn't sure what street I was on though, nor did I want to give this creep more time to decide what to do. Whatever sick things he had planned in his mind, the police were going to take a while to get there. I casually looked behind me once more, pretending I was just checking my surroundings and that I had not noticed him following me. When I took another look at the car though, I noticed there were now 2 men inside. The older man and another man who looked to be in his mid to late 40s. I was now infuriated. I had many thoughts running through my mind. Should I call my friend and tell her to meet me with the dogs? Should I call the cops? None of this appealed to me. I was too angry. I wanted to let them know I was onto them. In a split-second decision, I took off the backpack I was carrying. I grabbed my hairspray out and turned around. I marched toward the car as angry as ever. For some reason, I thought I could hurt them with my hairspray. When they saw my angry face speed-walking towards their car, while looking straight into their eyes, they must have been caught supremely off guard. They actually had a shocked and scared expression on their faces. Their car shot into full-speed reverse and drove down into a side street. I had no time to take down their license plate. I went to my friend's house and called the police shortly after. After I was done explaining everything to my friend of what had happened, an officer came and asked me more questions about the men. They also asked about the make and year of his car. Unfortunately, I didn't know much about any of that. All I'd noticed was the color. The cop told me they would patrol the area and let me know if anything ever came up. Unfortunately, nothing ever did. I never saw that piece of bark again. At the time, I kind of wished I did, because I would have loved to beat his head into a pulp, or at least take down their license plate number. I entered the student parking lot at my college campus. As I got out of my car, I saw a man standing a few cars away. I started walking, and the man called out to me, "Hey, remember me?" I said no, I don't, with a big smile. He replied back, "I remember you from high school. We were in Miss Smith's class." I never had a Miss Smith in high school, and I'm damn sure I would have remembered this guy if he was in my class, since me and my classmates had been together for all 4 years in high school. I told him sorry and I had to go. Then he asked what high school I went to. I told him and he swore he knew me again. I said I didn't recognize him. He then asked me for a ride to his class and said that it started at 9:15. My college classes started on the hour, and all my inner warning lights were going off right now. I was getting extremely weirded out by this guy. I said that I couldn't, and I had to go to class right away. I was walking away when he said out loud to me, "Guess I can't pull the wool over your eyes, huh?" A week later, the college campus newsletter said a man robbed a student at knife point. The student had given him a ride. The student had been asked the very same questions by the man as well. This may sound weird, but I met my eventual husband on Xbox Live on the Xbox 360. We started playing Halo together after just randomly being on a team one time. That formed into a friendship, which eventually led to a romance that led to marriage. I know for a lot of people that's crazy, and life usually isn't that fair, but I guess I'm really lucky. He was exactly the man I thought he was, and not some serial killer or catfish or something. We actually had a Halo-themed wedding as well. Every year we traveled down to the city to attend a massive video game convention. It reminded us of our love and how far we had come together. The conventions weren't just Xbox or Microsoft related. Having Halo present was definitely a plus for us though. It was something we looked forward to every year, and it's something we still continue to do together, and will do so for as long as we can. One time though, a few years ago, we almost had to stop going to conventions altogether. The day started just like every other convention he and I had ever gone to. Loads of fun, buying souvenirs, attending live talks, and meeting awesome like-minded folks. During one of the talks, they set up microphones at the end of the aisles, and you can wait in line and ask questions to the guest speaker. My husband really wanted to ask a question, so he got in line while I waited in our seat. I was mostly just listening to the other people's questions and enjoying myself quite a bit. That was when I noticed just about the worst thing I could possibly ever see. Sitting about 10 feet away from me in another row was my ex-boyfriend. We'd broken up 10 years ago for many different reasons. The Cliff Notes version was that he was an abusive and controlling man. I just tried to pretend like I'd never seen him and started looking the other direction. When I glanced back, though, he was very clearly staring at me. I could feel his eyes penetrating me. It was the most uncomfortable feeling I had ever felt. I was scared to get up and leave the convention hall because I thought he might try to follow me. I also didn't want to say or do anything because I didn't want to bring unwanted attention to the situation. After all he was doing was staring at me and not doing anything harmful, really. I guess it took about 15 minutes for my husband to get to the front of the line, but when he finally did, I recorded his question. After that little interaction, he came back to his seat, but he could tell something was off with me. He didn't know what, and I didn't want to tell him about my ex because I thought it might make him uncomfortable. We eventually left the talk and started doing other activities around the convention. I noticed, though, that every few minutes, I would now see my ex wandering around somewhere near us. It was making me grow increasingly uneasy. Finally, my husband asked what was going on, because it got to the point where I was giving him one-word answers and was more focused on keeping an eye on my ex than I was in the actual conversation. I decided to tell him everything and pointed out where he was hiding. I basically told him how horrible of a man that guy was, and most likely still is, since it seemed he was now trying to follow me. I forget how amazing my husband is sometimes, honestly. I thought it would make him uncomfortable, but instead he completely understood and asked if I wanted to leave early. I didn't, but at the same time I wanted to just get away from that man. We decided to just leave. As we were walking to the car, my head almost felt like a bobblehead. I was looking all around, trying to keep an eye on him. That's when I realized I hadn't seen him in over 15 minutes, and I felt my first wave of relief in the last few hours. We got in the car and started the somewhat long drive home on the highway. There was a lot of traffic, but once we got off of it, there was no traffic at all, except for one car following us. Now, ordinarily, this wouldn't really be an issue, but the car following us was following very closely. They had their high beams on the entire time, too. We tried to remain calm, thinking perhaps it was just some coincidence, but he wouldn't try to pass us at all, and if we sped up, so did he. I was convinced this tailgater was my ex. My husband tried to comfort me by telling me not to jump to conclusions. Surely it could have been anyone. We didn't want to head right home and have this car follow us there, though, so we decided to pull into the lot of a 24-hour gas station. It was about a mile away from our home. As we turned in, they did as well. We parked and they stopped right behind us, making it impossible to back out of the spot even if we wanted to. We were trying to look into the windows of the vehicle, but the windows were too tinted and we couldn't make out the driver. I pulled out my phone and finally called the police, something I should have done a while ago. A minute or two later, the vehicle drove off, thankfully in the opposite direction of our home. About 10 minutes later, the police arrived, and we described the vehicle. I told them about my ex. They didn't seem too concerned, though. Basically, just told me I couldn't accuse him without any concrete proof, even though deep down I knew it was him. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I got 3 phone calls from a restricted number in the middle of the night. Every vehicle light that drove by our house that night made me grip the sheets in fear. Luckily, the lights always passed by without further incident. I know he doesn't know where I live, but it's an irrational fear of mine. I know this story is perhaps more creepy than outright terrifying, but just put yourself in our shoes. We were terrified for our lives. If it truly was my ex tailgating us, I'm happy we were able to get away and that I'm able to write this story at all. Back in 2016, I believe, Dragon Ball Super was coming to America with the English dub. As a lifelong Dragon Ball fan, I was thrilled leading up to its release. The cast and crew of the American version were touring all over the United States. I got tickets to one of the anime conventions they were going to be appearing at. I was so pumped up to meet the voices behind many of my childhood heroes. The convention itself was a general anime convention, and it had a countless number of things to do, but Dragon Ball was definitely the main focus of the event. At least, it felt that way to me. The lines to meet the cast were, of course, super long, and the rooms where they were speaking and answering questions were packed to the brim. As ridiculous as it may sound, it was almost like being at a rock concert. People were screaming and yelling with excitement, myself included. Being that my friends don't really like anime and never really got into Dragon Ball growing up, I attended this convention all by myself. I didn't mind being alone though. There were so many like-minded people in attendance that I would have rather just been there alone in general. If my non-anime friends were there, I feel like I would have felt the need to babysit them the whole time, instead of just letting loose and being myself. At some point in the afternoon, I met a girl and I was instantly head over heels for her. Believe it or not only was she a super Dragon Ball fan like me, but she was dressed like one of the characters from the show, Bulma. If anybody out there is a fan of Dragon Ball, I'm sure you'll know the outfit I'm talking about. The woman at the convention had her exact outfit on, the blue hair, all of that. She told me her name was Jessie. We hit it off and spent the remainder of the convention together. I actually have a picture of me, her, and Sean Shamel, who was the voice actor of Goku on the English dub of the show. Around 9 p.m. or so, she asked me if I wanted to head back to her place, which she said was only about 20 minutes away from the venue. As you can imagine, it took very little convincing to get me to go with her. I was planning on just driving home anyway, so to me, this was an awesome way to continue an already amazing night. We got to her house, and I hate to say this, but I felt a little bit uncomfortable. She did not live in a nice neighborhood at all. All the houses were beat up and almost falling apart. Many of the houses on that street were boarded up and condemned even. I was happy that I'd driven my own car and followed her, because the more I looked at these houses, the more I felt like I was ready to just drive home that evening, in case the night didn't go so well. We parked in front of this big brick house that was completely concealed in darkness. I parked on the street in front of the house. She pulled into the driveway and waved for me to follow her to the back door, which I did. We walked in the back door of the house. I remember being completely shocked that anybody could actually live there. This place looked like it had been abandoned for years. I mean, there were even plants growing in some parts. I think I was blinded by my infatuation with this new girl, Jessie. I didn't see any of the red flags around me. Before I could even open my mouth to say anything, she spoke up first and said she needed to use the bathroom. She would be right back out though. I thought it was weird that she didn't bring me into the living room or offer me a seat or anything. I was just standing in this small room with trash everywhere. In this brief moment alone, I was finally starting to come to my senses. I was becoming more aware that something was weird about this. My alarm bells went off just a little bit too late, though. I felt a strike to the back of my head, and I fell to the ground. I tried to immediately jump back up, but before I could get to my feet, some guy in a hooded sweatshirt kicked me back down to the ground and demanded I give him my wallet. I handed it over without struggle on my end. My life was far more important than anything in that wallet. The large man shouted to Jessie that he had the wallet. She ran out from the other room, now just wearing a normal shirt and black leggings. They ran out of the house, and I heard the car drive away. I remained on the ground for a little while, in absolute shock of what just happened. I eventually ran to my car and called the police. As I drove away, I was thankful these idiots didn't rob my phone or my car keys from me. I was able to give the police a detailed description of Jessie, since I had a picture of us from the convention. I even remembered the color, make, and model of her car, since I'd followed behind her. It didn't take long. The police were able to track both of them down. Thank God they were both detained. I realized how lucky I was, because it could have ended much worse than it did. It doesn't change the fact that it was still one of the scariest moments of my life. When I was laying on the ground and that man was kicking me, I'd never been more scared before. And that was the last convention of any kind I'd ever gone to. After this nightmare of an evening, I'll probably never attend another one ever again. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with, and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.